Hey beautiful, welcome to Dr. Sarah's Café. This is a video where I share 5 powerful astrological signs that you're about to enter into a season of change and transformation. These are inspired by what I noticed and recognized in my own chart, as well as some common knowledge and basic principles of astrology. Bear in mind that each individual has their own astrological fingerprint. And so some of these signs might be very, very relevant and significant to you, whereas some of them might not be as impactful for you as they are for other people. So keep in mind that you always want to weigh any astrological insight against what your personal birth chart says about what's ahead for you in your life. This video is a follow-up to a previous video I did where I shared personal stories and experiences and insight and wisdom on going through multiple periods of change, pivoting, transformation in my own personal life. And so I wanted to share some of the astrological correspondences that I experienced, but that can also be indicators for the larger collective. So let's jump right in. The first one is pretty infamous, and it is Saturn return and other Saturn activations. Now, people have been making memes about Saturn returns and just really focusing on how Saturn returns completely upend your life, and in a way that is usually uncomfortable and sometimes painful, sometimes not the most pleasant change, transformation, or pivot. So Saturn being the planet of lessons, of wisdom, of boundaries, of hard work, it is a reminder of, what it really takes to actualize. And so I don't want to sugarcoat or put rose-colored glasses on what Saturn represents or what a Saturn return might mean, but I do believe and I do hold the belief that all the transits, all the planets are supportive for us activating and living out and actualizing our highest potential, okay? Now, Saturn has a cycle of about 27 to 30 years. And so most people experience a Saturn return in their late 20s, early 30s. Okay. So if you are coming up on that time in your life, or if you have recently gone through that time in your life, you might be able to think back and reflect on what were some significant life lessons that I learned around that stage, right? And so that time period for a lot of people is usually a time of intense maturity. You become so much more mature in those late 20s to early 30s. You learn some really significant life lessons that are going to carry you forward and support you throughout the remainder of your life going forward, okay? Now, if you aren't there yet, keep in mind that a good way to navigate a Saturn return is surrender, okay? Surrender, patience, cultivate a deep spiritual practice to get you through these lessons that oftentimes come wrapped in sandpaper or that are presented to you through challenges, okay? Now, I say other activations of Saturn as well, because the Saturn return, what I mean by a Saturn return is that the planet of Saturn returns to the exact place that it was in the sky when you were born. So if you were born when Saturn was at 18 degrees of Scorpio in the sky, then when it returns to that place about 30 years later, you're going to experience a Saturn return, okay? And so it can return to a sign, but it can also return to the exact degree. And so it's usually a span of a few years, a couple of years, because Saturn stays in one sign for about 2 years-ish. And so it's like a 2.5 year period or so. Again, it'll vary depending on your particular sign, your particular birth chart, when your Saturn return is, etc. But about every 27 to 30 years, we have about a 2-year period of a significant maturing or leveling up with Saturn returns. Other activations to Saturn, it could be Saturn sitting on your sun or Saturn conjunct your ascendant, right? So it's not always a Saturn return. Other Saturn activations, when Saturn is playing a significant role in the sky or making significant movements in our personal birth chart, we might also see some significant life lessons, some really challenging times that are trying to help us level up and gain more wisdom and maturity in life, okay? Now, the second major indicator in our astrology of a massive life change transformation is, of course, the planet of transformation, which is Pluto. Pluto, we are not likely to see Pluto returns in our personal charts because the cycle of Pluto outlives most people, right? It's over 100 years. I think Pluto might actually be 200 years, right? And so we're not likely to have a Pluto return, but we will all experience various Pluto transits. And what we mean when we say a transit is that as Pluto moves through the sky, it's transiting. So you can think of transit as movement, right? So as Pluto moves through the sky, it will touch certain parts of our life. It will touch certain aspects of our identity and who we are. And so when Pluto is playing a significant role in our birth chart, then we might definitely undergo a season of transformation. And Pluto moves really, really slow. So again, this will be a season of a few years, or at least a couple of years or more, where Pluto is really trying to dig out the toxicity in a particular area of our life. It's really trying to uncover and dig deep and really get at the heart, the core of what needs to be transmuted, of what needs to be purged or released so that we can heal and grow and develop, right? So Pluto is not for the faint of heart, okay? Pluto could be, it could be very painful in the similar way to Saturn, in that way that it is, uncovering things that we would rather keep buried. It might unearth things that we would prefer to leave buried underground, under the surface, and not really address. But it is like digging out or sucking out the toxins from a wound so that the wound can properly heal. Okay. And Pluto transits, again, can be more or less significant depending on what Pluto rules in your own chart. So if you are a Scorpio, for example, Pluto is a more significant planet because Pluto has a direct relationship to the sign of Scorpio. So keep those things in mind as you're listening to these astrological signs. A third astrological planet or indicator of a massive change, transformation, or pivot, and I will even say complete upheaval, is the planet of Uranus. Uranus transits. Again, Uranus is one of those outer, slow-moving planets that we are unlikely to have a full cycle of Uranus in our lifetime, but we will definitely have Uranus transits. Uranus in astrology rules the sign of Aquarius, but it is the sign of the future. It is the sign of technology. It is the sign of surprise, unexpected changes, sudden, seemingly drastic changes and shifts and pivots and just the unexpected. And so for me, I talked about seeing some of these transits in my own life. It was a Uranus activation, Uranus transiting through my 10th house, and complete, unexpected, surprising, utter shift, utter pivot in my professional orientation and my career orientation, right? And so I'll say this, Uranus, I felt, was more impactful to me than my Saturn return. I know Saturn return is like the most often talked about form of transition and maturity and growth, but that Uranus transit, I felt that it was so significant, so shocking, and so jarring to me that I had been on this pathway, like just steady, completely focused, completely sure that I was going to be continuing for years to come, and Uranus comes and be like, hey, we actually have other plans, right? Like, psych, you thought you were going in that direction, and we're going to completely T-bone your life and send you hurtling into a completely other direction, right? It makes sense in hindsight, right? Like when I look at my chart, it makes sense the direction that Uranus has shaken me into. But at the time, it was completely unexpected, right? I did not expect to suddenly have this internal shift that kind of innately manifested into the existence of this YouTube channel, for example. And so Uranus transits, not only are they about change and transformation, but just be mindful that they are very likely unexpected, quite surprising and hard to predict, okay? But what I was also saying about Uranus being the planet of the future, it makes sense to me that it also is a significant indicator of change, transformation, that life pivot, right? The massive life change, because Uranus in that way can support us in stepping into our future and embracing the future version of ourselves and our lives, okay? Now, the next transit is any 8th house transit. So this is not a planet. This is a space in your birth chart. And so if you know how to look up your birth chart, if you don't know how to look up your birth chart, I recommend Café Astrology. Total coincidence that it's also a cafe, but Café Astrology has a free birth chart. You can Google Café Astrology birth chart. I'll also link to it in the description box. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just found that they are really helpful because they have a written description of what the planets and houses mean for your birth chart, right? Whereas other free birth charts, they give you the chart and they just kind of, you have to understand it yourself. So the benefit of Café Astrology is that they explain what different things mean with your birth chart. So the 8th house, we all have an 8th house in our birth charts and the blueprint of our births. And the 8th house represents death and transformation, among other things, but it is notorious for being that house of things that we are composting. It is like the composting house. It's like, oh, this trauma comes in, or this understanding comes in, or this experience comes in, and we have to like transmute it and like turn it into some type of fuel. And again, it's also ruled by that planet of Pluto, right? So unearthing things, uncovering things, the hidden, the taboo. 8th house is also ruled by taboo things, right? And so when something is activating our 8th house, whether it's a planet that moves through our 8th house or making some kind of aspect to our 8th house, we can expect significant transformation. And I want to say transformation more so than like a pivot or a change. Oftentimes, transformation leads to a pivot or leads to some kind of external change in our life. But more than anything, an 8th house activation or an 8th house transit will lead to a very deep internal transformation, right? We're transforming from the inside out, and we become, as a result, if we lean into that transition or transformation and we embrace it and kind of again surrender to it, we come out more powerful because of it, because the 8th house can also be a house of power. The 8th house reminds us of where our authentic power resides and how we can best tap into our unique source or fuel of power, okay? And so, yes, again, these transits could be very uncomfortable, sometimes outright painful, stirring things up within us, stirring things up in our external environment. But again, if we really pay attention and remain present to an 8th house transit, we become more powerful. It is the house of power. And so anything happening in that house is meant to remind us of and help us tap into and access our greatest power. And the last one is the North Node. I love the North Node so much. People have different interpretations of it and different expectations of what it means. But the North Node, it could be a return. So when the present North Node returns to the same spot in the sky that it was in when you were born, again, that's a return, so a nodal return. But also North Node activations. So again, it being the North Node being conjunct a particular planet, or the North Node moving through a particular house in your birth chart. All of these things can really speak to your growth, your evolution, your destiny. The North Node in astrology represents what our soul, what our life is ultimately moving towards, the ultimate fulfillment of our destiny and why we incarnated in this lifetime, right? And so a lot of times the North Node doesn't really present itself in our lives until the second half of our life. And so what you'll notice is that sort of midlife crisis, or that quarter life crisis, or that usually it's a midlife crisis, right? That North Node really shows up in those moments, right? So usually early in life, we're not as tapped into that North Node energy. Usually early in life, we're focusing on South Node issues. But as we heal, as we mature, as we go through these transformative experiences in our life, we find, or in terms of what I'm able to discern and interpret, we find that we get more and more in alignment with that North Node energy, and where that North Node is trying to pull us forward to in our lives, right? And so for me, my North Node is in the 12th house. And so my increased focus on the spiritual realm, my increased focus on astrology, my increased focus on healing and, just spiritual concepts in general, and expanding those really speaks to getting closer into alignment with that North Node energy and that North Node calling our destiny on our lives. And so in relation to the previous video that I did, which is directly linked to this one, is destiny calling. And a lot of times the North Node in our birth chart speaks directly to the destiny that we're being called to in this lifetime, okay? So pay attention to your North Node if you take the time to look up your own birth chart. And with that, my dears, I want to leave you with a little reminder. I'm wearing one of my own merch pieces, Steeped in Love. And so if you would like to get a shirt or a mug or a sticker that speaks to the idea of being steeped in the energy of love, you can visit drsarahscafe.com/boutique. And on that note, I hope that this video has helped you in some way to refill your spiritual cup. And I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.